Welcome to another edition of Peace is Possible, where we talk about peace issues not being talked about in the mainstream media. My name is Joe Wasserman. On November 9th, 2019, the Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition held its 4th annual conference at Middlesex Community College in Middletown. The theme of the conference was Retooling the Connecticut War Economy. Medea Benjamin, a noted peace activist from a national peace and justice organization called Code Pink, was the guest speaker. In this third part of the video of this conference, we will hear from two veterans who are working for peace, David Iona and Mitch Link. Both are very dedicated activists. David has a program on Hartford Public Access Cable on veterans issues, and Mitch has run for the U.S. Senate. Both are working hard to oppose policies and powerful interests that promote endless war. We will also see the last part of the presentation by Medea Benjamin. Let me add a few comments. We all know that the first casualty of war is truth. A recent Washington Post article documented how the American people were misled as to the winnability of the Afghanistan war, as we were misled about the winnability of the Vietnam War. We were lied to about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. The president's justification for targeted assassination is very much along these lines. The American people deserve the truth. Since this conference, the Trump administration has escalated our military presence in the Middle East. I urge you to call the offices of our 2 U.S. senators and the office of Congressperson John Larson to oppose military escalation and call for peaceful solutions. Ask that Congress stand up and say no to needless war. You can be connected by calling 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. This is the telephone number of the Congressional Switchboard. Ask them to cut off funding for any possible war with Iran and to work for withdrawing our troops from danger in both Iraq and Syria, and to respect the wishes of the Iraqi parliament, which has asked all foreign troops, including U.S. troops, to leave Iraq. Ask them to co-sponsor the Sanders-Connor resolutions to cut off funding for any unauthorized war with Iran. Senator Blumenthal has done so already as of this taping. You can also contact myself, Joe Wasserman, if you would like to get involved with peace advocacy at 860-561-1897 or at joewass64@yahoo.com.
Let me just introduce Dave Iano, for the camera, was raised within the Green Monster as an Army brat. After 14 years of serving on military reservations overseas and all over the lower 48 states, on his 18th birthday, enlisted in the Army. In 1969, volunteered to go to Vietnam. He was trained as a medic at Fort Sam Houston and was attached to the 23rd Infantry at Chu Lai in I Corps near the DMZ. Married his high school sweetheart. They've been married 49 years. They have 4 daughters and a grandson. And he's a member of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 42. Also has a Voices of Veterans TV show on Hartford Public Access TV. Him and Steve Fournier will do that. He does county recruiting in the Hartford Public Schools for years. And you can easily find Dave's house on the busy streets of Hartford if you look at his flag that flies in front of the house, which he may share with you. Discretion. Thank you, Dave.
The flag that Jim was referring to is the American flag flying upside down or reversed. And for those of you who don't know what the message is a sign of distress. And it's been flying like that ever since 9/11 and President Bush, when President Bush assumed the presidency. So I haven't had a president yet, even though it was with Obama, I had hope, where I've been able to fly the flag correctly. So it's still reversed for now. I think it's, in retrospect, thinking about some of what Vic was talking about and what we can do and what we have done, rather than just come to meetings like this, which I think are valuable in the fact that we could all support one another and realize that we're not alone. I've been doing what is called counter recruiting in the Hartford Public Schools, but which I really just call alternative recruiting, because I felt I was invited by my first history teacher to come and talk to his class back in 1984 about my experiences in Vietnam, and I've been doing that ever since in the public schools in West Hartford, Windsor, Bloomfield, New Britain, and Bristol, and all around the state at the invitation of teachers, because I think it's very valuable that students hear what the military is truly about and what they might be taking part in. So that's one of the things I think when I totaled it out, I think I've talked to over 20,000 high school students in the past 20 or 30 years. So I think it's had a benefit for myself. I've often told the kids in classroom that part of what's going on is therapy for me, because I get to unburden a lot of things that I saw and did. For instance, when we are thanked for our service by people who want to appreciate the fact that there are veterans, I often say to them, I would prefer if you just say welcome home to me. Because when you thank me for my service, you don't really know what I did. And some of the things that I did, you might not want to thank me for. So it's kind of a bitter retort, but I think it's true. But one of the things that I think is practical and useful is when you come before your local government, whether it's at a Board of Ed meeting or a city council meeting, and you ask them difficult questions, and you put forth difficult ideas for them to consider. For instance, the city of Hartford we had a mayor elected for his first term, was put into the fear of bankruptcy, and they were going to force the people of Hartford to look at the fact that their city might be declared bankruptcy, which would affect all of our pensions, would affect our jobs, it would affect the assessments of our homes, and everything else that people depend on in their lives to exist. So I confronted them as city bankrupt. We're going to have to because in the city of Hartford, because it's a state capital, over 50% of the buildings in the city of Hartford do not pay taxes. The hospitals don't pay taxes, the churches don't pay taxes, and all the state government buildings don't pay any kind of a tax to the city of Hartford. The pilot program, which was payment in lieu of taxes, is drastically underfunded and not correct in the way it values the taxes in the city of Hartford. So we really need the state to look at the fact that some of the states throughout the South get a benefit from that because they get more return on their taxes than we do in Connecticut. So I went to the site that Miriam talked about, nationalpriorities.org, and I would consistently inform the city of Hartford that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have cost the city of Hartford over $400 million in federal tax dollars that we did not get funded for. And this is something that I constantly made them aware of. And I think that going before your city council and your board of ed is one way that you can fight back without necessarily occupying their offices, though I think sit-ins have their value. Because if you can lock down the mayor's office, they'll pay attention to you. The other way you can affect them is to publicly embarrass them. And that's basically what I've been doing my entire life in Hartford. During the war in Vietnam, Walter Cronkite used to come on the 6 o'clock news every night and inform the American people of the casualties that were occurring in Vietnam. They did a very good job of hiding the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nobody reported to the American people on a regular basis the amount of casualties that we were suffering in Iraq and Afghanistan. There was a website called iCasualties.org, and every month I would go to that website and I would print out all the names of the GIs who had been killed or wounded that particular month, and I would go in front of Hartford Board of Ed and also the Hartford City Council and take my miserable 3 minutes or more to recite every single name of every single GI that was killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't know that anybody else, any other, that was doing anything like that. And what happened was I made it apparent to them how many people were dying. And that was not even touching on the amount of Iraqi citizens or Afghan citizens that we were killing. So they hid the war. That's what they were very good at doing, was hiding the war from the American people. So that was one of the ways that I fought back, was to expose what was happening, not only to the taxes and the money that we were not getting, but also to the casualties that no one was being made aware of. And I felt that that was one way that I could be effective in bringing it to their attention. I also had one small victory that you can see the voice of one man had an effect. Because of old state law that was passed in Connecticut, it was possible for the public schools to not have school to have school open on Veterans Day. Their whole reasoning was that they would invite veterans into the classroom to talk about their experiences in Vietnam. That's why they would do it on Veterans Day. But the truth of the matter is that you could invite us in any day of the year. There are numerous historical dates in America that you could have veterans come in and talk about their experiences. You didn't have to take away one specific day that veterans enjoyed spending with their fellow veterans or their family. As a combat medic in Vietnam, I saw a lot of the worst things about the war. I body bagged a lot of people. And when I got home from Vietnam, I joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And the first Veterans Day parade I marched in was in Seattle, Washington, and we had garbage thrown at us. We were called traitors because we did with the peace activists, of which I'm sure against that war when it was going on. And it was the GI resistance, along with the support from the people here in the peace movement, that brought that war to an end. And today you have a similar organization called Iraq Veterans. I hand it over to Mitch and let him have his time with you.
David is a good advertisement for not even joining Veterans for Peace, which you're welcome to, but any peace organization. Get out there in Connecticut, talk to your family members, talk to the workers, talk to anyone you can, your neighbors, because the only way things will be changed and turn his flag back the right way, or around, is to each of us step up and do something. Mitch Lincoln is an anti-war veteran. After joining the Marine Corps at 17 and deploying to Iraq in 2006, he saw firsthand the role of American imperialism in the world. Mitch has been an active member of 350 Connecticut, or 350 CT, for the past 3 years, trying to link the anti-war and climate change movements together. He joined Connecticut Peace and Solidarity Coalition to try to knit his climate change and anti-war work together locally.
Thank you to the other panelists, and thank you for letting me speak to you all today. So what I'm going to do is I want to talk a little bit about my time in Iraq and how it helped me understand the situation we find ourselves in, and hopefully draw out some lessons from that we can use to fight against both climate change and the war machine here at home. So by the time I was 17, there was no one who could tell me that joining the military was not the best thing I could do with my life. I joined shortly after high school, and it was not long before I was living my dream of going to Iraq to free a people from a brutal dictator and to bring them democracy. After I arrived, it wasn't long before I realized everything I had been told, believed, and held obvious were simply lies. I couldn't tell you exactly how I came to this, but one moment stands out where everything kind of turned upside down. My unit and I were patrolling through the streets of Fallujah, Iraq. Some kids, maybe 15 or 16 years old, took some shots at us from a rooftop and ran off. I wasn't much older than them, just 18 at the time. We took cover in a house, and this realization kind of swept over me, that I had more in common with those kids despite growing up in completely different cultures, thousands of miles away from each other, speaking different languages, having a different religion, that I had more in common with them than I did with anyone who decided we should be there shooting at each other. I had more in common with them than the orchestrators of the war in Iraq. And I came to see that being in Iraq, we were making things worse. We weren't making them better. We were not making anyone safer, whether in Iraq or here. And the things that I had done were going to hurt for a long time. And the scars I carry are small in comparison to those of the society we decimated in the Middle East. As my time in the military came to a close, I started asking myself, for all the blood spilled in Iraq and Afghanistan, did we make anyone's lives better? For all the money spent, did we make this world a more just or equitable place? And for the 22 suicides that veterans commit each day from the trauma of fighting unjust wars, is anyone safer? No. I can tell you the rich made billions of dollars. They made it off weapons that blew up Iraqi infrastructure. They made it by controlling the flow of oil, a resource that is quickly closing the human viability on this planet. They made it off no-bid contracts to repair the same infrastructure we blew up. And they made it from employing people like me to serve as private contractors to protect the oil fields. And this is what the Iraq War was always about. It was about destabilizing the Middle East to ensure the dominance of American business. It was about profiteering from the destruction of countless lives, Iraqi and American. It was about protecting the American dollar. And it was to further entrench the military-industrial complex in the Middle East. And so as I discovered that the real aims of the war had nothing to do with why I decided to pick up a gun and fly thousands of miles away from home to join it. What I wanted when I went to war was to make the world a better place. And this is why most young people decide to fight. But fighting in a war doesn't let you decide its purpose, or even your own role in it. When you fight for the American military, you fight for the rule of American capitalism worldwide. Whether it's in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Kosovo, Vietnam, or Korea. When you put on that uniform, you do not enter a democratic organization. More than any other institution on earth, the military has perfected the art of coercion. The orders flow from the top on down, and at the top are generals, tied to the ruling rich of this country by 1,000 threads, and they trust each other with their lives. So right now, this year, the defense industry is slated to spend $956 billion. That is over 25 cents from every American, every hour of every day for the entire year. The Department of Defense is the biggest emitter of CO2 emissions worldwide. In fact, its carbon footprint outstrips most countries throughout the world. And it is also the biggest single buyer of petroleum products. Its most carbon-intensive activity is resource wars to ensure that they can get more fossil fuels to continue running their resource wars. You see the cyclical nature of the military. And currently, it has its eyes set on 2 more nations, and using kind of the same playbook it used to get us into Iraq. Brutal dictator, bad for the people, humanitarian aid. And we see that with Venezuela and Iran, 2 of the most oil-rich countries on the face of the planet. It's kind of interesting. So right now, there is no climate plan that recognizes that our resources can be thrown into weapons of war, and that these wars that made Halliburton of billions of dollars while destroying our environment. There's no climate plan right now that is even viable that doesn't say we have to retool our economy from one that serves the military-industrial complex to one that focuses on renewable energy and a green economy. So what could we do with the money we spend right now on death and destruction worldwide? We could pay for every household to have wind power or solar power free of charge every year. We could pay for everyone 18 to 21 years old to go to higher education, whether that's college or trade school. We could create the 1.3 million infrastructure jobs we need very badly to transition from a system that relies on fossil fuels to a system that relies on green energy and has a democratic public ownership of the energy industry, not individual private ownership of the things that power our nation. We could also double the number of public school teachers, which is desperately needed as well. We need a smart, educated population to really confront the situation we have coming down with the pipe with climate change. Climate change is not some far off, distant thing that's coming. It's here. Everybody knows we're breaking world record temperatures every year. We're having superstorms regularly. We've seen New Orleans and Houston be underwater from massive hurricanes. And these things are just going to get worse, whether we stop using fossil fuels now or not. So what we need to see is a reorganization of how we prioritize things in society. We need a reorganization where workers who have the most to gain and the most to lose by the decisions that they make control those decisions. So right now in Connecticut, we have most of the major military industrial complex companies. And some of the smartest people I know in Connecticut work for those companies. And they work on making death machines. Their brilliance needs to be used on something that will actually benefit humanity. And the resources we throw away on worldwide murder can no longer be used, or we're not going to have a sustainable planet. The IPCC4 report shows that we have 11 years to get to net neutral carbon emissions. 11 years. We know we can do it. We've transformed the economy in this country several times. We transformed it in World War II from a country that produced a car every 8 hours to a country that produced a tank every 15 seconds. The brilliance is here. The technology is here. What we need is the political will to do so. And how do we get that? Well, there's one thing we can't do. We can't hitch our train to politicians who only talk about things that only are starting climate change now, that there's an actual movement in the streets. We can't hitch our trains to either of the parties that are controlled by the rich. I mean, Obama ran on an anti-war campaign. That's what brought him to the White House. And he started more wars. He bombed the same countries we were bombing before, and he started more. And he upped how much we use drones worldwide. And that can't happen. The anti-war movement was smashed by hitching its train to the Obama presidency. Just like the climate movement will be smashed if it hitches its train to any Democrat or any Republican. It has to be independent. And we need independent movements that bring up principled demands. And that's the only thing that matters. Nothing in this country happens without a mass movement. The civil rights movement didn't happen because the president was suddenly enlightened and wanted to sign the Civil Rights Act. It happened because millions of the people were in the streets, independent of both political parties, demanding change. And that's what we need to do. What ended? It wasn't because all of a sudden they said war was bad, we need to bring our troops home. No, the military said we're not doing it. The soldiers on the ground said we're not doing it.
And in terms of the whistleblowers, it's the same kind of thing. It's just hidden from us. And so there's a good network of people who are working very hard, and they have great lawyers and good defense teams. But the problem really is getting this out to the American public and getting them to know about it, and getting them to understand that whistleblowing is so critical as part of what is supposed to be a democracy, that these people are the kind of people who should be elevated on a pedestal, not necessarily the people who are being elevated now.
Okay, I think you're next, and then maybe one more.
Right, I remember over a decade ago, one of the major anti-war marches in New York City. I remember going to that march. We started at one end, 100,000 of us, marched down to the other end, and got on a bus and went home. End of story. What was that for? What was that for, I have to ask. And recently I read an article by Chris Hedges. The time for those kinds of marches are over. What if we had 100,000 people saying, "To hell with this, we're sitting down"? And in a way, I'm kind of addressing everybody here. We all have grandchildren. We love them. I'm terrified for them. Hell, I might see the end. If I make it to 90, I don't know if I'm going to make it to 90 because there won't be anybody making it over the next 10 years. So I'm tired of going to marches and just marching. I'm tired of going to meetings and just having a meeting. I mean, what do we have to do? I live in Middletown. I get frustrated because Middletown sleeps. Middletown sleeps. And we know what's going on, people. We know what's going on. What are we going to do for the next generation? What is our responsibility for the next generation? I'd like you to comment on that.
I would just alter a little bit to say not what are we going to do for them, what are we going to do with them? Because, you know, that is where it's at right now. And it's amazing what people in high school are doing right now. It's amazing what somebody like Greta Thunberg did to raise consciousness worldwide. That level of commitment is quite extraordinary. And so I think you're totally right, except I would say that there are some good things that come out of those one-day things, which is people get to be with each other and network with each other, and other ideas come out of that. But it's not enough. And I was just talking with somebody a couple of days ago from the Women's March, and they said the next Women's March is not going to be come in and march around on a weekend. It's going to be sit-ins. It's going to be civil disobedience. It's going to be real actions. So people more and more are starting to understand that. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important to look at what is happening in a place like Chile. They don't go home. They stay. Or if they go home for a quick shut-eye and come back on the streets. And they're out there again and again and again and again. And that's how you make change happen. You don't make it by coming to a Saturday. And you say New York, I know in D.C. where I live, it's every single weekend there's something. Whenever shut down on the weekend. And I said, if you had a tenth of the people you get on the weekend and you just take them into Congress and you sit down in somebody's office and refuse to leave, you'll get a lot more accomplished than you will walking around in a circle on a weekend.
Let's have one more, and okay, so let's go over here.
It's not just the arms manufacturers that are calling Russia an enemy. It's the government of Russia right now, not the people, but the government. Since the fall of communism there, they're becoming, very capitalist and, money hungry and everything else. And I think this is why Trump is, aligning himself with Putin. Both of them are the same kind of character, and I'm afraid what's happening in this country, in Russia, and China too, would like to see us break up. They're talking about, the right wing is talking about having a civil war if their president is removed from office or threatened to be removed. So how do you counter this about Russia being an enemy,
I think it's very dangerous the way that the Democrats are portraying Russia. I don't want Russia interfering